A prominent Canadian economist is predicting that inflation could go negative. And today what we're going to talk about is why that is actually a real possibility, how the inflation numbers work, and what's really leading to higher prices in today's economy, and what it means for you going forward if you're looking at buying a house or getting a mortgage or borrowing money in general. But before we get into it, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video, and don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers. We have now surpassed 15,000 subscribers. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much for showing up. For those of you who aren't subscribed, please do me that favor. Hit that subscribe button. If you do, you could be entered for a chance to win $5,000 to put towards your RESP or RSP TFSA to pay down your mortgage, to pay down other debt, or to simply do with what you like. But you have to be subscribed to enter. So go ahead, click that subscribe button. It's free, it's easy, and it's definitely worth it. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit. Product, penalty, price, in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's discuss the prominent Canadian economist that's predicting potentially negative inflation rates going forward. And the economist that we're talking about here is David Rosenberg, one of the best economists in the country. This is also the guy who predicted the housing fallout back in 2007, 2008, at least one of several of them. And he's a really great economist, knows what he's talking about. And he has some opposing views to many of the people out there who are predicting that inflation has nowhere to go but up, and we are going to hell in a handbasket. And there are some really great reasons for this. I'm going to jump right into the article from BNN Bloomberg where he talks about this. And this is the headline: Rosenberg predicts inflation will go negative within a year. He cites a few reasons here. He's taking a look at what's happening in Asia and most of Europe, where inflation is still running between 0 and 2%. He's looking at things like job rates, and he's looking at things like the supply chain, which are obviously leading to higher prices, which in turn leads to inflation. There's also some conversation about base effects and other things in here, and just a really interesting conversation, because where many people are expecting that inflation has nowhere to go but up, there is some legitimate economic data that supports the fact that we could actually see it turn and go the other way. Because here's what's happening this week in the economy. We're seeing different markets basically fall as a result of new fears with the Delta variant and with the idea that the pandemic may not be over with certainty. And what that lack of certainty is doing, it is causing people to slow down their spending again and ultimately not put all of their money into the economy out of fear that they may need it if we start going into lockdowns in the future. And while Rosenberg doesn't necessarily suggest that he thinks, in fact, he does suggest that he doesn't think that we're going to be back into major lockdowns over the winter, he does suggest that there is some fear about that, and there is the potential for there to be small lockdowns in certain areas as the Delta variant rears its ugly head. Now, that is all things that weigh on the minds of consumers, and as a result, it leads to a situation where we could, in fact, see prices start to fall again in the future, especially as supply comes back online. Now, I want to show you this other article. This one is out of the Globe and Mail, and it states that a dramatic rebound in hiring could throw the Bank of Canada's inflation expectations for a loop. So this article, in contrast to what Rosenberg is saying, is if jobs come back and we start to get back close to full employment, we could actually see higher inflation rates. So basically what we're seeing here is we're seeing this contrast between people who believe that there is going to be high inflation and the things that could suggest that there's going to be higher inflation. And we're seeing a conversation from the people who believe that there may not be high inflation based on the fact that supply and demand is having a greater impact on inflation than the actual amount of money that's been injected into the economy. And what I want to show you guys today is I want to show you one of the first things that economists learn when they go into university, and that is this really simple supply and demand curve. And why the supply and demand curve is important is because we have two things that have happened in the economy during the pandemic. We have had, one, there's been a significant amount of money injected into the economy, and two, we've had major interruptions to supply. And I guess there's actually a third thing, which is we've had pretty significant changes to demand in certain aspects of the economy. So things like restaurants have significantly lower demand. Things like housing in the suburbs has significantly higher demand. And when you put that in context of a supply and demand curve, this is a really simple explanation of what's going on with respect to prices. And Well, it may be partially that there's been money injected into the economy. What the data is showing us is that it's not necessarily the money that's been injected into the economy that's causing inflation, because a lot of people are still keeping that money in savings. They're paying off debt. They aren't necessarily going out and buying things and doing the things that they normally would do at the rate they normally would do it. Yes, increased spending has occurred as a result of things opening up, but it's not back to the previous levels, and it won't get back to the previous levels until we have full employment. So what that leads us to is this conversation of, well, okay, if there isn't full employment and full spending, what that means is that we almost with certainty have at least some aspect of supply and demand playing a role in prices and inflation, along with base inflation rates. And here's the thing you have to remember about inflation is it is based on the previous year's prices. So what we could see here is we could see prices go up this year. And then as supply comes back online, we could end up seeing prices come back down next year, which is leading to what Rosenberg's suggesting, which is negative inflation rates going into 2022. Now, I want to explain how supply and demand works really quick and this basic supply and demand graph, because this is what it is. It's a graph. There's two lines. One line is demand, the other line is supply. Price is on the left axis, quantity is on the bottom axis. And basically what happens is as you shift supply and demand, prices change. So for example, demand being the curve that is on the downward slope here. As you get less demand, you get lower prices. So what would happen if you saw a shift in demand? So increased demand in something like housing. So that is what this shift is. Well, what you see is that the point where demand intersects with supply is the price. And if you shift demand up or increase demand, prices tend to go up. So that's what's happened in the real estate market recently, along with lower interest rates. The lower interest rates led to higher demand, along with changes in preferences in housing types led to higher demand. And that's what happened. We saw this shift in prices in housing. Now, with respect to other goods, things like the materials that are needed in order to to build houses or to build or make cars or do other things like food, animal processing for meats and whatnot. What we're seeing there is not necessarily a shift in demand, although that has gone up slightly. But what we're seeing in things like food and the things that we see on an everyday basis that are going up in price is we're seeing supply chain issues. And what that means is that the supply has gone down, and that's represented by a shift in supply to the left. And what you can see here is that when supply goes down, prices go up. And that's what's happening in a lot of the economy is because there's been lockdowns in areas where things like microchips are getting produced, or lockdowns in meat processing plants, or lockdowns in just general parts of the economy. What ends up happening is you get the supply reduced, and because the supply is reduced, prices go up. And that, along with increased money in the economy, is what's leading to higher prices. Now, the question is, how much of this is decreased supply and how much of this is money being injected into the economy? Well, here's what we know. We know that after something like a pandemic or a war, people are hesitant to go back to spending. That's consistently true going back to the 1920s and the Spanish flu and just after World War I. It's also true in the 1940s, just after World War II. People are hesitant, usually for a year or two, to go back to spending. And what that means is that the increases in prices are likely a shift in supply or reduced supply from the supply chain curves or supply chain issues, and therefore actually things that could be brought back to normal in the future. So what happens then when supply chains go back to normal, things start shipping normally, and we start to see more supply? Well, what we'll see prices come back down. Now, they may not come back down to the levels that we saw pre-pandemic, but they will almost certainly come down to prices that are less than what is happening this year. And what that means is that next year we could, as Rosenberg suggests, see negative inflation. Now, if we see negative inflation, guess what that means? Probably doesn't mean higher interest rates. Probably means we're going to get to keep those variable rate mortgages for longer, and we're going to be able to take advantage of low rates for a longer period of time, because with negative inflation, we can't see the Bank of Canada going and increasing interest rates anytime soon. So what this all means is that anybody's crystal ball is foggy at the best of times, but I think Rosenberg makes a really valid point. And what he's telling us is that nobody can really be a predictor of what is going to happen with inflation. We see the Bank of Canada, we see the Federal Reserve basically saying, Inflation is something that we're not overly concerned about. I think this is part of the reason why. And therefore, what that means is that we probably shouldn't be making decisions based on an expectation that inflation is going to go up. And we should really just be watching on a monthly basis what's going on in the economy and making our decisions based on the best information that we have at the time. And right now, the best information that we have is that if we're taking variable rate mortgages, we have at least a 12 to 18 month runway where we're going to save a pretty substantial amount of money. And if interest rates do start going up, we can look at locking in down the road. So this is all, a really interesting conversation. When it comes to mortgages, when it comes to investing, you can only make decisions based on the best information you have at any given moment. The evidence out there that inflation is a given just isn't there. I know that people feel like it's a given because of what's happened in the past in the 1980s, where, it was a drastically different economy. Interest rate sensitivity was significantly lower. It's just we live in the past and we live under the shadows of the 1980s, which I can tell you unequivocally that until we get to 10% inflation rates, we aren't there yet. And what we need to be thinking about now is how do we save the most money right now while we have the opportunity? That means getting the lowest interest rate you possibly can, it means getting a variable rate mortgage, in my opinion, and looking at locking in down the road. Now, if you're in the market for a mortgage, if you're in the market for a house, we have the First Time Homebuyer Bootcamp. We have Secrets to Getting the Lowest Interest Rate. Both of those courses are linked in the description below, and they're both designed to give you the best information you can. We understand that not everybody can come to Mortgage 360 to get their mortgage. However, we want to make sure everybody has the best information possible. So we've priced both of those courses so low that anybody who takes them will get at least 10 to 50 times their value back out of them. In fact, we've put an offer for Mortgage 360 in both of those courses that will guarantee that you get at least 10 times your money back. So links in the description below. I sincerely hope that you will join us. The Secrets to Getting the Lowest Interest Rate course has a 50% off coupon off the already discounted price. So if you want to join us on either of those, go ahead, do that. And if you found this video useful, other than that, go ahead, click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers. I sincerely hope you, and especially you, because you made it to the end of this video, are one of the winners, or the one winner. Sorry, there only is one winner, but I hope it's you. Yeah, you, the person who's watching right now to the very end as I drag this out. I appreciate you. Thank you. And we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.